I love Tunic. I hate Tunic. It reached down deep into my emotions, rooted around until it found some, and then caressed a few while spitting on others. And I don't mean a guttural, emotional reaction to a well told story. No, I'm talking about pure, animalistic reactions brought out from experiencing a game that offers so much with so little guidance. Free roaming exploration feels incredible when you're on the path, but it isn't hard to get led astray by your own curiosity. Combat is a rhythmic dance that will punish anyone with two left feet while rewarding those who aren't afraid to add their own stylish flair by utilizing items. These two components, exploration and combat, are at the core of this title, but it's all on you to figure everything out. Any tutorialization you receive will come from experimentation or uncovering pages of a hieroglyphic textbook that gives small insights into the world, the controls, and what it is you're meant to do. In Tunic, the onus of learning is on you, whether you like it or not. The result is a game that is unapologetically laconic for better or worse. Tunic is a title that not only made me ask questions about it, but also how I go about reviewing games in the first place. Beyond questions like, is the combat fair and fun, or is the lack of guidance a pro or con, comes more deep-rooted things to ponder. Is it acceptable to use guides while reviewing a game? Were the emotions I was feeling due to frustration with the game or frustrations with my expectations? Did I rush my experience with this game because I just wanted to make a video on it, or because I had felt satisfied with my completion of each area and was ready to move on to the next? And is it possible to despise a game's design so much that you actually kinda like it? These are questions you may not give a shit about, and perhaps then this isn't the video for you. But these questions were just as integral in forming my final opinion of this game as were the mechanics and designs I experienced, so it only feels natural to include them. Bottom line is, Tunic is a game that boldly trusts its designs as well as the player's intelligence, or more so, their drive to uncover the next mystery that it houses. Regardless of how you feel about Tunic, it isn't afraid to say, hey, look, this is the game. Take it or leave it. So with that, welcome to my critique of Tunic. The thing about Tunic is that it doesn't care about you. It is unflinching and unyielding in its dedication to telling you as little as possible. It's not hard to draw comparisons to the original Legend of Zelda in this regard, but truly it's a game that will not hold your hand and give you a Capri Sun simply for trying. You will meet the game on its terms, or you will quit. It's as simple as that. It all begins with the main menu screen that gives way to a small fox waking up on a beachside. There's no introductory cutscene, there's no flash of dialogue setting up the world, there's nothing. This is the world, you are a fox, good luck. That's the sentiment the game starts with, and it's not necessarily a bad thing in the game's opening hours. That's because smart level design limits how far you can get, while the areas you can access feel relatively easy. This lack of combat difficulty in the early stages affords you time to breathe, as you learn how to equip items and weapons while familiarizing yourself with the lay of the land. The overworld is not huge, but it has many jutting protrusions that you can explore as you progress further into the story. For now though, you're limited to some grassy lands that aren't too difficult to navigate. It's in this opening hour in which you'll most likely find a stick, learn how to equip it as a weapon, and go about defeating enemies, making your way towards the first real weapon, the sword. Besides weapons, many items are littered throughout the world, waiting to be uncovered in treasure chests. Just like with everything else, you're not told what items will do, and are encouraged to experiment with them to reveal their potential. The problem with this though is that the number of each item you uncover is pretty limited, and having to waste one to test it doesn't feel very good. It reminds me of that age-old problem in games where players hoard items because they're too afraid to use them now when they might need them later. That issue feels marginally worse here because we aren't even told what items do without testing them. Still, in the early goings, you aren't likely to be aware of what's to come, and intrigue alone will be enough to get you experimenting within a limited capacity. I say limited because you're only allowed to equip up to 3 items at a time. This includes your trusty sword, but also consumable items, as well as ranged weapons you'll find later. There's no quick menu either for fast switching, which becomes a real pain in the ass during some of the later boss encounters. Now, it is nice that you're allowed to map each weapon and item to a specific button, but really, it just would have been nice to have more options. As you continue pushing forward, you're going to stumble upon more weapons and items, such as a shield for blocking, a magic potion that can freeze enemies, a magic wand to do ranged chip damage, and a lamp to light up dark environments. These items are all critical to your success in Tunic, and you'll have to uncover them on your own. Again, this isn't an issue in the early hours, as your options for where to go are seemingly hampered, meaning you're likely to stumble onto the critical path. The game trusts the player to intuit things on their own, such as the dark tomb being hard to navigate before getting a lamp to light up the way. Tunic trusts that you'll be so engrossed by the lack of direction that you'll start to think about the world in a literal sense, and for the most part, this works as intended, as you're simply trying to get a grasp on how the game works. More is required of you since the game gives so little, and in this way, it's really immersive to play. You're in a dark area, what's gonna solve that? Find a lamp. It only makes sense. It's not hard to draw parallels to Dark Souls in this regard, and it's undeniable how much Tunic is inspired by it, maybe even more so than it is from the original Legend of Zelda. Throughout the world, you'll find bonfire save points that you'll respawn at upon death. Speaking of dying, you'll lose a portion of your currency each time your health hits 0, but it can be recovered if you make your way back to it. These mechanics are staples of From Software titles, but the biggest point of comparison is the ambiguity of the world and the disinterest in telling the player what to do or where to go. It goes without saying at this point, but this approach to game design remains remarkably effective at luring you in. But a key component to the success of this approach is that you make combat feel approachable, even for the newest of gamers. If players find themselves getting walloped consistently in the first area of the game, they are way less likely to feel compelled enough by ambiguity alone. This feeling of tough but fair progression is integral in the success of the Soulsborne games, and that's true of Tunic as well, since it chooses to borrow so much. Luckily, that works out well for Tunic in the early hours, because combat doesn't feel difficult as you get your feet wet. The tools you are provided seem like enough to overcome each challenge. These basic blob enemies are slow and they don't hit very hard, and the soldiers are limited to very basic attacks that are easy to dodge and block before returning fire. The soldiers get progressively trickier as new variations are introduced, but it's done in a segmented way, not introducing the next version until you've had ample time to learn the previous. Still, each of them can overpower you if you play recklessly. It's good to instill this sense of rhythm to combat early, since the boss encounters will force you to play cautiously. This is felt best in the game's first 2 boss encounters, one with the guard captain, who mostly tests your understanding of how soldiers attack, but more importantly with the Garden Knight, who serves as the game's first real checkpoint. This fight is insanely challenging if you haven't found the sword, shield, and first magic item, as well as the lantern to reach it. Notably, it's not impossible to do so, allowing for early sequence breaking, which is commendable. Still, most players are going to require those items and knowledge to overcome this fight. Garden Knight doesn't have an incredibly diverse moveset, but there's enough variation, combos, and damage output to deplete your health in a hurry if you aren't careful. It strikes the balance between fair and challenging very well, and to me, it's the best boss fight Tunic has to offer because of this. So, I've been a bit of a liar so far, as there is one major way that Tunic attempts to guide you directly. While out and about, you're very likely to run into these glowing pages. When assembled, these pages create a literal guide to the game. Now, these harken back to the popularity of game guides in the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s in a time before high-speed internet, where you couldn't just look up the solution online. These in-game pages are still quite hieroglyphic though, as the game utilizes a made-up language to present them in. Some English words are included, but players will have to intuit a lot of this for themselves. Entire mechanics such as how to level up or how to fast travel are hidden in these pages, alongside of helpful maps and even a bit of finger pointing on where you are to go next, at least in the early game. Some of these components are vital to your progression throughout the game, especially if you choose to play blindly. The choice to withhold these items, and thereby the information they contain, was an interesting design choice. The onus is on the player to find these out in the world, but failure to do so can easily see them getting completely and utterly lost. This isn't too much of an issue in the early stages, but as we begin to shift our focus towards the second act, the problems in this design become more apparent. If Tunic were a science experiment, this lack of hand-holding would be the constant, the thing that doesn't change, while difficulty would be the variable that determines your perception of the game. Transitioning into the second act naturally ramps up the difficulty, but it's here where Tunic begins to struggle to stave off player frustration. Your first major goal is to ring 2 bells that grant access to an ancient temple. This is concluded when you defeat the Garden Knights, and your focus then shifts to recovering 3 ancient keys. A guide page will tell you that 1 is found in a hidden forest, 1 was stolen away to the peak of the sky, and the last is buried deep underground at the root of the world. From there, you're expected to find these locations for yourself, some of which have 2 entrances instead of just 1. Your time in exploring the overworld itself is coming to an end, as those protrusions I mentioned earlier become your focus. Finding them though is challenging, as only the first one is relatively simple to spot. The hidden forest is full of spell-casting mice who focus on doing range damage as well as chip damage in the form of fiery candlesticks that burn your little fox hide. These enemies provide a new sort of challenge, as most enemies up to this point have engaged strictly in melee format. So these mice are new without ramping up the difficulty too severely. And the dungeon they reside in is also fairly well designed. Like most others, it's full of shortcuts that the player can unlock to skip out on previous sections if they were to die. This prove you can do it before we let you skip it approach has always worked well for this style of game, and that remains true here. It's at the end of this dungeon though where the player comes face to face with the siege engine. This rocky behemoth of a creature takes up a large portion of the arena, but its size is just a decoy, as it can move around very quickly. It's only vulnerable on its head and on a tiny pillar protruding from its backside. Reaching either of these can be difficult, as the beast is constantly repositioning itself to face you, leading to moments where you'll get stuck between its legs or on objects in the arena. The fox is dwarfed in size so much that it's easy to lose track of where you're at in relationship to the creature, which is frustrating. This inability to see your avatar or move freely is a disadvantage that the player must contend with alongside of powerful melee and laser bursts that the creature can dish out. Overaggression is punished by a laser barrage that will stun lock and kill you from full health if you aren't careful, which adds to the frustration. The fight is certainly not insurmountable, but it does represent the first time in the game where the balancing act seems to skew against the player maybe a bit more than it should, and it's a sign of things to come. With the red key recovered, it's best to set sights on the green one next. At least that's what most online guides will suggest you do. Without utilizing one, it's very easy to feel lost in Tunic, as you question what it is you are meant to do next. As a reviewer, I try to minimize how often I use guides while playing a game for video purposes, but Tunic opened up my eyes more to the nature of reviewing games. Is it cheating to use a guide when you are lost? For a casual player, the answer is an easy no, but as a reviewer, is the onus on me to struggle through a game in the name of giving a proper, uninfluenced assessment? Or is utilizing outside help a natural part of gaming that doesn't affect the review? Tunic made me want to consult an online guide so many times that this question really bounced around in the inner workings of my mind as I continued to play. Those temptations usually won out, by the way, and perhaps that will discredit the work of this video for some viewers, but when time, storage space, and patience are all limited, what is a player to do? Turning to a guide for help will be a natural move for anyone just playing the game, but does that quick Google search become problematic when done by a reviewer? And I'm of course going to say no. Tunic was so cryptic in its design and presentation that seeking out help online only felt right, as a way to alleviate the frustration of where to go next. Metaphorically stumbling around in the dark didn't seem to be a particularly fun experience, and after spending 10 minutes or so frantically searching for where to go next, I gave up. The layout of the world is so grid-like that getting from point A to point B is maddening at times, as you can't find that one simple pathway to reach the next area. Consulting an online walkthrough on YouTube showed me exactly where to go, and with the aid, I reached the next area easily. So let's see it up close, shall we? To get that green key, we're going to need the hook shot that lets us jump over gaps by grappling onto metal prongs. This item is housed deep in the sewers of the frog domain. This area is along the critical path to completion, but good luck finding the entrance. Uncovering the next area you're meant to go to is sometimes a pain, but it pales in comparison to finding these hidden but required paths that the game utilizes. To access the frog's domain, the player must venture to the northeastern part of this area, go up a small and kind of concealed ramp, intuit that this path isn't leading to just a hidden treasure chest like many others do, and then keep venturing off in a direction the camera doesn't show you before the world spins around, revealing a ladder that can be climbed, and yeah, it was completely hidden from view. The game is way too reliant on moments like this, and will hide many other areas, whether it be doorways that aren't completely lit up, or hidden paths that are tucked away beyond the camera's view. It's on brand for the game, but that consistency isn't necessarily a good thing in this regard. Creating a cryptic world full of mystery and intrigue is impressive, but when you go so far as to hide away important areas from the player, you're doing your game a disservice, especially if they are mandatory. No one who gets lost here is gonna feel good when they uncover the entrance for themselves, and those who choose to use a guide will simply think about how stupid the title is for doing this. Strap in though, because it's going to become a fixture for the rest of the experience. Reviewing my gameplay footage reveals many instances in which the fox stands idly as I furiously grunt at an unskippable 15-second YouTube advertisement just waiting for that video guide to play. Perhaps it was me being unwilling to meet the game on its terms, or maybe it was just poor choices in game design. Each player will have to determine that for themselves. Regardless, recovering the hookshot opens up the world much more, adding a sort of Metroidvania-like element to the experience. It allows us to reach other portions of the beach where we can pray to monoliths that divert power towards the statues in the center. This allows us to teleport to an ancient library, where the stolen green prize of the Frog Kingdom can be found at the top of a tall tower. A deserted library full of seemingly useless books, chalkboards filled with no answers, and a makeshift teleportation pad awaits you. Someone has been busy looking for answers, and you'll find this inquisitive person lurking on the structure's roof. The librarian is the last well-balanced fight in the game, so long as the player has found the magic wand that allows for bursts of small range damage. He mostly levitates out of range of your standard melee attacks, meaning it's imperative to dispose of the ghostly enemies he spawns to harvest their remains for extra magic points. Those vital blue orbs restore some uses in your wand, allowing you to do more damage. His moves can be read with ease after a few attempts, and then the fight boils down to your reaction time and inventory management, which is all good. It's after this point though that Tunic starts to act up, and not in the best way. The final blue key is found deep underground in the quarry. This is another location with 2 entry points, both of which are rather obtuse to locate. One entry is on the side of a mountain, where its view is blocked by many rocky outcrops and a camera that refuses to twist. The other entrance is behind a locked gate, requiring the player to bob and weave around it using the hookshot. Now, you could argue that the game does the hide the critical path trick enough times that the player should actively be looking and checking for them. However, when the player isn't even sure where the next area will be, as is the case with the quarry, there's going to be a lot of wasted time looking around the wrong areas. Time is such a valuable resource, especially to me, and having a game waste my time isn't particularly fun or enjoyable to me nowadays. Call me a casual or a victim of map markers, but to me it goes beyond that. It's a reflection on the busyness of everyday life. In the quarry, we find new enemies, including ones that can pulverize your health bar with a well-aimed sniper shot. The grenade slingers and sword slashers don't pose as much a threat, but they would certainly be capable of killing you in one hit if your max health was reduced to 1. Good thing that doesn't happen, right? 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 Wrong. In the quarry is a radiating pink stone that will drain your maximum health relatively quickly if you stand in its light for too long. I'm never a fan of when games take away from the player's power, stats, or abilities in the name of increasing the difficulty. If they don't find a way to wrap it back into the story, whether it be to reflect a character's moment of weakness or to emphasize a theme, then it just ends up feeling arbitrary. As if the developers decided, hey, what's a way we can make this harder? Oh, I know, let's strip the player of something they've become accustomed to, perhaps even something they've invested resources and stat boosts in. Yeah, let's get rid of that. It's artificial and it's annoying. There is of course a way to mitigate this health reduction in Tunic, but it's buried at the end of this area, meaning you're going to have to navigate the gauntlet of enemies while dealing with the penalty. It encourages a lot of panicked sprinting, knowing that one misstep can kill you, while simultaneously an idle foot will deplete your health. Now, to give the game credit, this is another area with plentiful shortcuts that allows the player to skip sections once they've proven themselves. Still, it's no cakewalk to reach the gas mask that prevents you from taking health reduction from the pink miasma. With that equipped, the player makes their way down the quarry in hopes of finding the blue key. If they are anything like me, they will sprint right past the hidden path leading to one of the most powerful weapons in the game, a gun. Despite its limited ammo count, its 3 shots are capable of shredding 25% of the next boss's health bar. It's a supremely useful item, but I wouldn't even know it had existed if I hadn't looked up tips on how to defeat the scavenger boss. Is that the game's fault or my fault? Again, Tunic is a game that demands you meet it on its terms to progress, or at least with a decent internet connection to look everything up. If I don't like it, does it make it bad design? Of course not, but that doesn't mean that those choices aren't infuriating at times. The next area in the game, the Hidden Vault, is one of the most impressive stylistically as well as atmospherically. It feels like you've stumbled into a place you're not supposed to be, as if you've witnessed a crime by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still, it's like a siren's call, luring you in despite your brain telling you to get the hell out of there. I love when games are able to evoke this sensation. It's here where the player's awareness of the story starts to shift towards its more sinister questions. You'll witness trapped spirits, doused in the pink light, be captured in the monoliths you've been using to progress the entire game. You've only ever known them as power conduits that light up statues and grant you access to new areas. Little did you know, people were trapped inside, prisoners physically to the metal, but also mentally to the pink glow. It's a really cool way to get the player asking more questions to themselves. This impressive area gives way to the Scavenger Boss, a relentless foe who is capable of heavy-hitting melee attacks, high damage output ranged attacks, as well as an AoE move that is a pain in the ass to dodge. He's also incredibly quick and can get across the field with ease, which makes it hard to gather yourself after a tough portion of the fight. This encounter seems borderline unfair in this regard, solely because of the massive divide between what you can do versus what he can do. The cross-arena slashes punish you for attempting to drink a potion. The explosion from the grenade can hit you through objects, and the AoE effect has a pulse around it. You only take damage on the solid white line of the pulse, but the purplish effects that reach you first can easily trick you into rolling too early right into the damage. And in the heat of the moment, it's asking a lot of your brain to not concern itself with this effect. You're meant to play defensively in this fight if you plan to do it without items. You can block many of his attacks, but they also drain your stamina rather quickly, and it doesn't recover while you're attacking. This means you can eat 2 hits with your shield, lose all your stamina, and then not recover it as you attempt to get back in for a single hit. Inevitably, the boss goes right into another attack and wrecks you before you get a chance to recover. Admittingly, I didn't have all the stamina upgrades, but even if I had, I can't imagine it would make this fight feel more fair, solely because of how quickly it depletes and how limited it is to recharge at times. Stamina management in games is fine, how I love the Souls games, but what we're given just isn't going to cut it for most players in the final hours of Tunic. Instead then, cheesing becomes an alluring option. Why play defensively when you can go on the hyper-offensive, abusing items to win the fight? This is what I did, as I took a few rounds to memorize the boss's attacks and do my best to learn their timings and how to dodge. From there, I equipped a rune that swapped my health potions for magic potions, as well as magical blue berries that restore your magic points. Luckily, I had accumulated 9 of them, a small fortune in a game like Tunic. I waited until I had a good run, in which I had used all my restorable potions and magic points while still having decent health. From there, I deployed the berries and ended up winning the encounter. This approach didn't really feel good though, and my opinion on the game was really starting to sour around this time. It's not like I had switched up my strategy in a concrete way, because consumables are so limited, meaning I only had a few chances to get this strategy right. Berry spamming was not a real option, it was a privilege that I was afforded through hoarding, and I was lucky to capitalize on it. It felt like the only way to bring my power level up to meet that of the bosses. With the dust settled though, and the blue key in my possession, it was time for the endgame. Have you ever played a video game in which you reach a point where the story feels like it's wrapping up? That the final confrontation is imminent, only for the game to go on another lengthy tangent before you can reach that fateful fight. It's annoying, isn't it? It makes you want to rush through this extra content the game is forcing you to eat to get back to that climactic feeling you get from pushing towards the final boss. Tunic is one of those games. Returning to the temple and unlocking the 3 gates using your keys does jack shit. Perhaps you should have seen this coming by now. Nothing happens, at least nothing obvious. However, in the fast travel room, the final boss has just become unlocked. Not that you have any way of knowing that, unless, again, you stumble upon it or you look it up online. Reaching the final boss triggers a fight that ends with your death, and the beginning of the game's final act. When first reaching this room, you may be shocked to see this character come at you, massive sword in hand, as it's easy to assume that this is the fox's mother and that you've been working to save her from the mystical prison that she's stuck in. Instead, she lunges at you, kills you, and drains you of all your power. The world turns to night and you awaken as a ghostly apparition. The world is different now. There's ghosts everywhere who look a lot like other foxes. Speaking to them reveals more of the cryptic language with only a few words of English coming through. Little did I know that I just entered the game's lowest point. Explorational and combat difficulty are about to be taken to the highest level, but not so much in a skill-based way, but instead in a bullshit way. There's very little in the way of guidance now. At least before, you knew what your objective was, and could maybe follow the maps to reach them. Now, who knows what you're supposed to do, or where it is you're to go? At this point, earlier gripes become full-on frustration, as now it really begins to feel like the game isn't respecting your time. There's a new area that's unlocked that you just sort of have to stumble into by getting lucky. And what's your reward for reaching it? Invisible enemies that can two-shot you. The earlier fight with the air strips you of all your stat upgrades. They're all stripped away and they're all thrown to the wolves. You don't have them anymore. You're left as a fox with no claws against an unseen force who's quite formidable. It makes the pink aura stones from earlier look trivial, as now all your stats are nuked, taking that earlier frustration to a new level of annoyance. It's not only your health anymore that's gone, it's everything. And to add injury to insult, the invisible enemies aren't the only threats here. In fact, they may not even be the worst, since they're able to be stun locked once you find them. So, remember the scavenger's mask from earlier? The one that prevents you from taking a penalty to your maximum health when exposed to the neon pink aura of the quarry sedimentation? Here, the game decides to forego the effect of that item by giving the enemies the power to reduce your maximum overall health with pink rock charged attacks, regardless of whether you have the mask equipped or not. Shots from these birds will drain what little health you have left after being reduced by the invisible enemies. It leaves you feeling quite powerless, and the story is so vague and cryptic that I'm not so sure it's meant to be this way. It doesn't feel like some smart way of connecting the player's emotions to the fox's motivations and feelings. It's just a bad rub for no reason other than to be obtuse. You'll have to make your way through a cathedral full of doppelganger enemies, all of whom hit hard and chase you indefinitely. By this point, all I wanted to do was run past it all. Between the letdown of the anticlimax, to the nerfing of my powers, to the bullshit enemy abilities, I just wanted to be done. I was sick and tired of Tunic, but little did I know, it had yet to deliver its final helpings of beatdown on my morale. Waiting at the bottom of the cathedral is a massive room full of statues that must be activated to proceed. Doing so spawns in a horde of the displayed enemy type, and the player must overcome all 6 in a row with nothing but the items you bring and 1 chance to replenish your health. This means defeating roughly 60 enemies in a row, And yes, I actually took the time to count. This includes 7 of the Rudlings, which are those sword-wielding soldiers from the early game, 11 frog lizard thingies, 5 teleport spellcasters who hit with powerful AoE attacks that stun lock, 15 skeletons who spawn in very quickly, 20 drones who blast you from all angles who can also stun lock, and then finally an encounter with a monolith guardian and the actual garden knight boss from the early game. All of this. No chances to heal, no chances to save progression. It's just you, what you bring, and one chance to heal up a little extra from the final statue. I'm sorry, that's bullshit. I'm gonna call it what it is. It's bullshit. It is not insurmountable, but after the game has detoured you down here, after setting up the final encounter, it just feels relentless and endlessly frustrating. The game decides to throw everything, including the kitchen sink at you. And for what? Difficulty for the sake of difficulty. It was at this moment where I reached my melting point with Tunic, and did something I would never normally do. I played around in the menus and found accessibility options, including ones that give you infinite stamina and infinite health. I flipped on the health one, and I got past this gauntlet with no frustration, no regret, and no bad feelings. If the game wasn't willing to play fair anymore, then neither would I. Now, for many others, this choice may invalidate my experience with Tunic, but I ask, does it really? What did I really lose out on by skipping a portion that frustrated me? Did I cheat myself of the experience? Sure, maybe I cheated myself out of extra pain, but does that really affect my attitudes and perspectives towards this game? No, at least not in a negative way. Like I said, it isn't a choice I made lightly, but recently I've been enjoying Noah Caldwell-Gervais' take on the Dark Souls series. In his over 5-hour-long video, he goes into great detail discussing the toxicity of the get good mindset and how the series has traditionally encouraged players to try different approaches, many of which act as impromptu difficulty modifiers. He argues that a player's experience with the games, the ebbs and flows of challenge, are up to them to decipher for themselves, along with the worthiness of those choices. It's all an individualist's perspective and decisions that truly matter. Here in Tunic though, I don't have the wealth of options that you do in a Souls game, and so I turned to the option I did have. I don't feel any better or worse for the decision I made, and was simply glad to move on. I beat the gauntlet, I collected my dash ability, and prepared for what was next, hoping it would be the final showdown with the heir. Instead, the game says no. I mean, you can go back and fight the heir, but you won't last long without first restoring your lost attributes. To get them back, the player must locate the 6 hero graves that they most likely didn't give a second thought to as they experienced the world for the first time. Anyone who remembers the location of all 6 of these on their first go is an absolute legend who should be praised. It's another instance here in which the game almost demands that you use a guide, unless you want to lose more of your precious time. Finally, you'll get all your powers back, close your internet browser, and prepare for the final fight with the heir. This fight, oh boy. It's at least more fair than putting you up against 60 enemies in a row. At least there's that. The heir's first phase, and yes there are 2, is acceptable, save for a lunging sword slash that's hard to predict and comes in incredibly quickly with little time to react. There's also her AoE move in which she projects 3 rings at one time that overlap with one another. It takes some fancy dodging to get past this, not that I ever learned how to do that anyway. I took damage every single time. My heart sank though when I got her down, only to see her get back up and prepare to beat my ass once more. In the second phase, things get insane. They give her the ability to drain your maximum health, as well as an upgraded version of that AoE with 5 rings instead of 3. She will also leave behind an infected area that will damage and drain your max HP as well. It's all just a bit much. As I review the footage, it feels more doable than it first came off as while playing, and perhaps that's my cooler head prevailing. All I know is I was ready to be done. I was done with this game, I was done with this fight, and I wanted it to end. So I slapped that infinite health back on, went to town, defeated the heir, and finished the game. I watched as she perished, and my fox went on to take his rightful place, just like the game guide had told me. And that was that. The end of Tunic. Or so I thought. The only problem is that most of the issues I've criticized and torn into Tunic for is exactly what the developers expected me to say. You see, Tunic has a meta commentary on the nature of gaming and how dependent gamers have become on map markers, hints, tutorialization, and video game guides to baby them through an experience. It rejects the notion that players need all of these supplementary aids to overcome the challenges presented to them. The hidden critical paths, the tough bosses, and the enigmatic nature of items are designed the way they are with intent, to hopefully remind players what they can accomplish if they apply themselves. Frustrating some people, such as myself, was always going to be a consequence of this. Without taking your time to explore every area, study the instruction booklets, and solve every puzzle, the player will receive the bad ending to the game. This is the ending many players, including myself, will receive. It's a damnation of the player for going at the game like a bull, headstrong, and determined to brute force your way through it. So let's explain that bad ending before looking at the bigger commentary that's provided through reaching the good ending. Tunic tends to keep its story pretty vague, but we can infer that we're experiencing one loop in a cycle that is played out countless times. The manual says this directly, and it's further supported by the number of ghost foxes we see once nightfall sets in. Before this loop, a great power was discovered revolving around the pinkish aura. The people began to harness this power, but using it created a distortion in reality, and the only way to save the world was by locking it away with a hero capable of keeping the apocalypse at bay. To further cement the chances of the world's survival, a time loop was set in place that sees a younger version of the hero spawning in, battling forth, and eventually overcoming the heir and taking their place. This cycle continues on and on, heroes fighting older versions of themselves to take their place, and that's what we see as a result of the bad ending to the game. When you defeat the heir, they're gone, and you take their place and are locked away. This is but a simple interpretation of the game's story, but that's part of the beauty in Tunic's narrative, that anyone can interpret this however they choose. That's my rough approximation, and it doesn't have a lot of detail, but there's plenty of people out there who can tell you more. But truly, it doesn't really matter if I'm right or wrong in my assessment. The point is, the cycle continues when the player simply defeats the heir like I did my first time around. However, this ending is not what the game wants from you. Defeating the heir sees the credits roll, but a menu will pop up shortly after. You can choose to start New Game Plus, but the game warns that you've missed out on a series of pages in the manual that may change things up. You can jump back into your file right before you fight the heir and continue your search. Completing this puzzle-filled journey will see you reaching the good ending of the game, so let's look at that now. To get the good ending of the game, players must find every single piece of the manual that's been scattered around the world. By this point, you're most likely to only be missing a few, but a handful of them are hidden behind incredibly obscure puzzles. Nearly any player will notice the page that hints at the good ending, but only the most inquisitive will follow this line through to its conclusion. And yes, I do mean the literal lines. There are a series of line puzzles that the player must solve using inputs on the directional pad. The game takes on a meta level, as the controller's D-pad is referred to as the Holy Cross, and was quite literally a religious relic for the people of this world. Some of these directional inputs can be found directly in the manual, while others are scattered around the environment. This includes 20 fairy chests hidden throughout the world. The most attentive players will notice oddities in the world design as they venture through it. They come in the form of line puzzles, and players must input their directional movements correctly to spawn a chest containing a fairy. The game requires you to find half of them to unlock the manual's final few pages. There is a page showing you the fairies' hideouts, along with some vague hints on the location of the fairies themselves, but to be blunt, I'd be stunned for any casual player to uncover these secrets for themselves. I mean, even after looking up a guide online and using it to find the fairies, I still don't know exactly why it worked. I studied a few of these environments and compared my inputs to them, and it just didn't work for me. Maybe I'm dumb, maybe I'm not dedicated enough, or maybe it's just asking a lot of the player. Of course, we're only getting warmed up, because the final puzzle will require not only a nearly completed manual, but also time, patience, intelligence, and a bit of pen and paper. Throughout the game, you'll occasionally notice references to the Golden Path, a prophecy stating one day a hero will come, walk the Golden Path, and do away with the time loop. Turns out, this Golden Path is quite literally just that, an actual golden path. Strewn throughout the pages of your manual, observant players will notice golden pathways on some of the pages. These are more line puzzles, and when put in the proper order, they reveal the final input players must use to open the Great Mountain Door. Doing so rewards them the final piece of the instruction manual, which contains a note from the developers telling them that they can now unlock the true ending of the game. And I don't want to gloss over this puzzle, because from what I can tell, it takes a massive amount of studying to get it right. Hell, the code it provides is like 50 inputs long. That's crazy, and if you figure that out for yourself, like, well done, I applaud you. But once you have all the pages, you can return to the heir. They will lay down their sword and learn of the truths you've uncovered by reading through the manual. This breaks the cycle and reveals that the heir wasn't your mother at all, but simply an older version of you, confirming the time loop mentioned earlier. The player is treated to some shots of both versions of the fox relaxing together and enjoying each other's company. Still, with the time seal broken, it's unclear what will happen to this reality with the threats it protected against active once more. So now that we've solved all of Tunic's mysteries, we can reconsider many of the issues I've lambasted the title for. The truth is, as cool as the instruction manual is, with all its secrets, puzzles, and knowledge, it doesn't alleviate much of the frustrations I had with the game. Sure, some issues are solved by flipping through the booklet. Hell, a more careful observation of the map would have made the entrance to the Frog's domain a little bit easier to find. But outside of these navigational holdups, many other complaints still persist. The booklet isn't going to solve the misbalances in combats and enemy design, and it certainly doesn't elaborate on some of the game's central mechanics. For example, what it is each of these cards does. Tunic can chastise players who rush the experience by giving them the bad ending, but sadly, despite how cool its mysteries and good ending are, they don't solve many of the game's shortcomings. Sure, the number of secrets jam-packed into the game make for unlike anything I've played in quite a while, perhaps since The Witness, but it isn't enough to melt the moments of annoyance and questionable design that hampered many parts of my experience. It no doubt bolsters the game, but it once again reinforces that Tunic is not a game of give and take, but instead a game of take and take. In all honesty, it only took me about an additional hour to unlock the good ending, because of my choice to use a guide online. Ironically, I was still able to achieve the outcome that the developers reserved for only the most invested of players, while doing so in a way that the game discourages. Lazily. I looked everything up. What resources players use is out of the hands of the developers, but it does feel like a cruel fate for such an impressive game. Even with the intent of designing a game that rewards players who give it their all, any casual player will still be able to find a litany of helpful guides online, giving them all the answers they need while circumventing much of the frustration. Arguments can be made either way for whether this robs the player of the experience, but it's truly something that must be assessed on an individual basis. For me, I was grateful to use a guide to point me in the right direction. That helping hand alleviated my annoyance and allowed me to see the game in its entirety, and that allows me to appreciate its approach to secrets much more. It excites me to know that players who want this sort of cryptic experience can get it with Tunic. It's a rare commodity in a world that holds the player's hand so much. It's simultaneously a throwback to games of the 90s, where a handheld guide may be the only thing that's out there to help players who are stuck. For most, there's a reason we left these sorts of games behind, but a resurgence in any genre or approach is never really a bad thing. I stand by the issues I've outlined in this critique, as they are true to my experience, but I do believe this is a game that many players will fall in love with, and won't see my shortcomings as issues at all. New Game Plus, then, is perhaps the more enjoyable adventure for players like me, as with full knowledge on where to go, the only thing that can hold you back are the difficult and sometimes unfair bosses. I'll be doing a bit of exploring and sequence breaking throughout this part of the video as I casually play through some of the title again, as we hit on some of the game's presentational elements. Before we get to that though, I can't refrain from how counterintuitive it is to offer a New Game Plus mode in this particular game. Narratively, the good ending breaks the cycle that has haunted this land for years, meaning that the hero need not to be reborn anew. There is no heir for them to defeat and release in the good ending of the game, making New Game Plus a head-scratcher from a storytelling perspective. Of course, maybe the team just figured that you deserved a chance to experience the game with souped-up stats, powers, abilities, and knowledge after dragging yourself through it the first time. Regardless, the inclusion of a New Game Plus mode really only makes sense for players who received the bad ending, but, you know, we press on anyway. This more casual run through the game allowed me to truly enjoy the art direction and visual design of this game much more so than in my first confusing run. With the bigger questions of where to go and what to do answered, I could take time to appreciate the character design, the charming environmental details, the varying atmospheres that permeate the lands, and the interconnected level design that allows for sequence breaking. The fox is absolutely adorable, but I also love the way the world is shaped. A heavy usage of simple textures and shapely environmental objects creates a distinct sense of style. From the way your character bounces a bit as he walks, to the way grass jiggles as you push through it, to the ever-present shadow effect in the overworld, it all helps form a cohesive sense of place. On top of that, it's not hard to get engrossed in the wonderful atmospheres that have been carefully crafted using sound, music, and color. The snowy, isolated mountain is home to a massive locked door, conveying a sense of loneliness to the player. The core's use of neon pink lighting, along with all the masked enemies and harmful music, creates an area that feels alien, but alas, you are the thing that stands out most here, different from all the rest. You are the alien in this sense. And the overworld feels cheery and upbeat, making it a homey place to return to. So many different moods are conveyed in this game through the visuals, sound, and atmosphere alone. It's truly impressive. Speaking of the sound, it's a great aid in this game. While the music, or lack thereof, bolsters the mood of each arena and environment. The sound is what aids your gameplay experience. Every action has a distinct sound that's easily recognizable, but also reflective of the cartoonish nature of this world. More importantly, boss encounters do a great job of incorporating sound cues to let the player know what is about to happen. This helps in pattern recognition and allows the player to predict what is coming next to respond appropriately. Or utterly fail, as I did many times. A quick note on bugs and glitches, and I'm happy to say I didn't run into a single issue with Tunic's technical side. I didn't notice any frame rate drops, pop-in, weird AI behavior, or anything unintended. It feels like I haven't been able to say that in a review for a while, so it feels nice. And finally, on level design, this game is actually more open than I alluded to earlier, especially when playing on New Game Plus with a bunch of your items. Hell, even on New Game, you can go straight to the quarry if you utilize a few cheese strats. There's an achievement for getting the gun before the sword, and that's pretty neat. But like I said, it's on another level in New Game Plus, as you can pretty much go anywhere you'd like from the very start. There's so many ways to skip sections of the game, whether it be uncovering a hidden ladder or taking a shortcut behind a waterfall. I love when games allow you to do this, and it's no different here. So from a presentational standpoint, Tunic is fantastic. You won't find hardly any complaints on this game's music, art style, animation, technical side, level design, or graphics, which is pretty impressive in today's gaming landscape. Never have I played a game in which I hated so much about its design while still finding a way to enjoy it. But that's Tunic. Despite all the criticisms I've hurled at the game, I can't deny how much enjoyment I got out of it, even if some of it was done with outside help and accessibility options. It harkens back to an era of video games in which help, and therefore progression, wasn't guaranteed without an uncompromising commitment from the player. We may have moved on from this era, but Tunic's success proves that this approach to game design influenced some and resonates still with many. Despite not seeing eye to eye with this game in many regards, I can't help but to feel a sense of respect towards it. Tunic does things on its own terms. Get with the program or get left behind. It's like a revenge tour for 80s and 90s games who didn't have the capacity to guide the player as much as modern games. In this way, Tunic is commendable for sticking to its guns and rewarding players who choose to see it as more than an action game, but also as a puzzle game, filled with deep lore, obscure puzzles, and perplexing mysteries to uncover. For better or for worse, Tunic lives and dies with its design choices. I'm not personally eager for games to return to this approach, but playing one every once in a while is refreshing. Simultaneously, I'm grateful for the additional resources available to us in this modern gaming landscape. It's just nice to be able to hop on Reddit to get some advice from other players, or use a walkthrough to decipher where it is I'm to go next. This applies to every game for me, not just Tunic. It just so happens that this is the game where I used help the most. I've come to the conclusion that it's alright to use your tools, so long as it's the experience that you want to have with the game. For me, I was able to sidestep some of the frustration I felt from this game, and that clearer mindset allowed me to appreciate the game more for what it was. A brilliant, unwavering, and steadfast video game that puts its faith in you, the player. Thanks for watching. Alright, that brings us to the end of another critique, and I hope you enjoyed this look at Tunic. For those of you who don't know, this is the first Xbox exclusive I've ever reviewed on the channel. And that's because I just got my first Xbox. Ever. Seriously, I've never owned one. I bought a Series S a few weeks ago in anticipation of Starfield, and I'm loving this box more than I thought I would. Game Pass is such an instant hit. Like, it immediately absorbs you into this ecosystem. I'm of course still working on Elden Ring and the video for it, but after that, I know there's a big dry spot in game releases for the next few months. And being able to experience Halo Infinite and Forza Horizon and Gears of War and all of them for the first time, yeah, that's gonna be pretty sweet. It's also nice to know that I can tackle Microsoft exclusives on the channel now, which will only help this community grow. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Let me know if there's any Xbox games you want me to check out. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.